Hello, friends. I'm Henry Seltzer, and I'm going to give you a small presentation today about some of these new planets that I talk about quite frequently when I do my presentations for the new and the full moon. I think that it would be handy for people to know a little bit more the basis of why I'm so convinced that these planets are important in charts. I say all the time, this is what they mean, and this is how important they are, and this is significant in the things that are coming up in various configurations, including mundane configurations and with the USA chart and so on. And I'd like to give you a little background. So I've done quite a few presentations showing my research, showing my evidence for these. And I'm just going to give you a little bit of a taste. And then there's more resources that you can tune into that you'll be able to find out more information. So let's take a look at a PowerPoint that I have prepared for previous incarnations of this. And I'll be doing a share screen. So you should be able to see the first slide, and this shows the glyphs that I'm using for these new planets, and we had to create our own glyphs. The astronomer that discovered these said, that's up to you guys. He didn't want to get involved with the glyph manufacturers. So when he said you guys, he meant the astrologers, and that was what I took on to create glyphs for these. The glyph that we have already popularized for Eris, it's becoming the standard glyph for Eris, I'm pretty sure. Now these other two glyphs are a little bit newer. The other software manufacturers have received copies of them, and they are going to be coming out in a new ephemeris of the trans-Neptunian KBO planets, which I tend to call them planets rather than dwarf planets, because dwarf planets makes them seem like they're less important, but they are actually, if you think about it, Pluto is a dwarf planet also. So these planets that are beyond Pluto in the Kuiper belt are really KBO planets. That's the best designation for them. And this is Haumea, which is named after the creation goddess of the Hawaii people. And she gave birth from all different parts of her body and regenerated as a young woman. So this glyph is a variation of the Pluto glyph that looks a little bit like a pregnant woman. And this glyph is a variation of the Pluto glyph, the chalice glyph, that looks a little bit like a birdman, because Makemake was actually the creation god of the Rapa Nui people, another Polynesian god, or another Polynesian deity, I should say. And, birdman was associated with the Rapa Nui culture, as I've described elsewhere. So that's the glyphs that I'm using, and let's just take a look at some of these positions. This is the orbits of them. Compared with the orbit of Pluto, you can see they're quite a bit further out. Pluto has a period of 248 years. Haumea is more like 284 years. And then Makemake 309. Now, if you talk about Eris, it's so far out there when it gets to its aphelion, which is in Eris, which is its furthest point, which is where it was when it was discovered. Brighter than Pluto and denser would have been discovered sooner along with Pluto, except that it's so far away from its normal, it comes in within the orbit of Pluto, but then it's a 556-year orbit, gets all the way out there, and that's where it is right now in Aries. It goes very slowly through Aries. So that gives you a little bit of a taste. You can see here Pluto and also Eris. They're about the same size. Eris is much brighter, also denser. And so I like to use the chart of Angelina Jolie when I'm talking about Eris because it's very characteristic. In fact, in Angelina's chart, here's Eris along with the moon and Mars. And this is up near the top of the chart, the Gogolin sector profession. And she has a profession as a warrior. She showed up in many of her movies as a feminine warrior. That last slide, you can see that's one of her movies she's promoting there with the guns. And here she is, one of the most beautiful women in the world, and yet she does present with this kind of warrior approach, many of the movies, including the movies that she directed. Now, another amazing thing about Angelina Jolie that I always like to bring to the fore, one of the things that's unique about her is she did take a decision, a huge decision, because she had the gene for breast cancer, She didn't want to be not available for her children. She lost her mother to breast cancer. And she did not want, she has quite a few children that are adopted from the third world and also natural of hers. And she didn't want to not be there for them. And so she took the drastic step of that double mastectomy, which she did and then announced on Mother's Day. I forget the year, not too long ago. But it turns out when she made that announcement, transiting Eris was somewhere right around here in her Jupiter Chiron. And Jupiter and Chiron together is having a philosophy of life that is painful. You know, that there's a painful situation. Usually it revolves around the fact that it comes away from the parental facts that were given, you know, how they started in their beliefs. So it's kind of a radical belief, and the difficulty of having to face a radical belief. And here you have it that pretty much at that midpoint transiting Eris when she made the decision, did the operation. And if you think about the symbolism also of Eris with the moon and Mars, Mars rules surgery, moon rules the breasts. Eris represents the radical decision. So what I've been articulating all this time is that Eris is a spiritual warrior energy, very strong in its actions when it comes to from deep principle. And Angelina Jolie's chart and that decision she made does illustrate that. So tons of examples, you know, all the feminists that I could find, paradigm shifters that take a strong position. I, you know, looked into the chart of Gal Gadot, feminists such as Angela Davis, Carl Jung as well. I mean, not Carl Jung, but Einstein as well, has Eris right at the top of the chart. And he became, you know, this 10th house, this is standing in the world. He became the most famous scientist in the world with that shock of wild hair. And just as Eris, which was apart from his sun, you see, just as Eris moved closer and closer to his sun, finally, a couple of times touching it, but then touching it, going past, coming back and stationing directly on his sun to the minute, was 1905. And I looked in his birth data to see what 1905 would possibly be, and it is a very important year in Einstein's life. It was called his Annus Mirabilis when he wrote the first paper on relativity, but including a total of 5 papers that really overturned the foundations of modern physics. And they actually consider that to be a very significant year in his life. So that was interesting to discover that. I'll kind of race through these examples, but another example is Newton, who had Eris with the moon. And Eris with the moon a lot of times has to do with seeing things from a different perspective. And of course he did. The law of gravity and all this optical stuff that he brought forward, he was a revolutionary scientist in his day. And the fascinating thing also about his position of Eris with the moon is if you look at this timing of, this is when the Royal Society of England announced his first paper on the motions of heavenly bodies, it was called in Latin. And this was just an important day in his life because this was the very date that he brought that forward. There was an eclipse. You can see that there's a lunar eclipse going on that date at 1 degree of Cancer. And his Eris was at 2 degrees and the moon at 2 degrees of Cancer. So that's another piece of evidence. All these evidences, you know, keep piling up very interesting ways. I was able to predict the Brexit situation because when they voted in June, there was a conjunction of Uranus and Eris in the sky at 23 degrees. This goes back, of course, to June of 2016. And in fact, the Saturn, this is the chart of the UK in the middle here, which is from January 1st, 1801. That's the chart that people use for the UK. And here you have Saturn was at 23 degrees of Leo, exactly trine, partile trine to this partile conjunction of Uranus and Eris, which doesn't come along all that often. You know, it stayed for a long time around 23 degrees, Eris did. Uranus moved on. And then not only that, but Mars at 23 degrees of Scorpio retrograde was making a square. And I took one look at this configuration in the months leading up to Brexit, and I said, oh my gosh, they are going to pull out. I mean, retrograde Mars. They're going to do it from their own standpoint, looking internally, what do they feel is what the right thing is. And then the rebellion indicated by Uranus with Eris, you see, also making a trend in the structure of what was going on, the structure of the government, how that might change with Brexit. And even though most people thought it wasn't going to happen, I could see very clearly from these aspects that it was going to happen. Tried to get my bet down on the result because I would have made money, but I wasn't able to get a bet down without having a UK address. So that's what happened there. This is an interesting character. Paul Watson founded a group called Sea Shepherd, which was an offshoot of Greenpeace. And you can see the pirate flag. They were very intent on stopping the whaling, the deaths of whales from whaling adventure. And the founding of Sea Shepherd, it turns out, was in June of 1977. And look what you have in the sky in a grand trine. You have Saturn, you have Eris, and you have Neptune, all together in a grand trine, fire signs in the sky, matching in Paul Watson's chart, his 14-degree Sagittarius Venus, and this is actually a sunrise chart for Paul Watson. So we don't know that Venus might be the chart ruler, actually. And so it's interesting to see this lineup because Saturn with Eris refers to fairness. It's always defending the underdog. And when you see this in a grand trine with also Neptune ruling the seas, and this is Sea Shepherd, and they were taking violent action to, they would foul the propellers of some of the whaling ships, or they blew up some ships without hurting people. So they were very strong in their opinion of what they were trying to accomplish, and they had a very deep mission to do it. So this is another, I feel like it's kind of an iconic chart to have such a grand trine and fire in exactly the same degree, quartile grand trine. Very interesting. I have many charts that I've looked at. Now let me just say that I found this in a bookstore and I thought this is perfect for Eris, the feminine warrior coming alive in this decade, in this century, I should say. And certainly that's true. The feminine's on the rise, and it is happening in a certain way that we're not taking women just to be some kind of adjunct to the male as a patriarchy. The old patriarchal system is falling down in that way. And the Me Too movement is evidence of that. Also, that came along the March on Washington that was coincident with the Trump inauguration in 2016. Also, when that Eris was happening that summer. So this is a book I wrote, The 10th Planet. And this is available on Amazon. There's other resources that we can mention too for looking more into Eris, like where your own position of Eris is going to be. And that would be, the TimePassages software would be a great one. We do have interpretations for Eris in the standard edition of the TimePassages software, the advanced edition. And also, we're going to put a number of links that go to our website that there's more information that you can pick up on there. So this is, as I say, just a quick taste of things. And let's talk about as well some of these other, now there are more KBOs out there that have been identified, but the ones that have been officially named are 4 in number in the Kuiper belt. There's Pluto, there's Eris, and there's Makemake and Haumea, and these are also significant in charts. That's the rest of my research that is current right now. Haumea has a funny shape because of the orbital speed, so kind of similar to the Haumea goddess that does the shape shifting. And then Makemake is almost as big. These 4 are the largest KBO objects, and you can see they're smaller than the moon, but they're bigger than the biggest asteroid. So there's a lot of information that I was able to gather. Naturalists like John Muir, pictured here. Actually, Teddy Roosevelt was one of the environmental presidents. He set aside a lot of lands. He said, what'll happen when the trees are gone, when the forests are gone? And I was able to discover that the Haumea and Makemake both refer to a profound connection to nature. So anybody that's pushing nature, that is kind of fond of nature, that has nature as a fundamental part of them, I look at the chart and I always find strong Haumea. Interestingly, with these two, It turns out Teddy Roosevelt has Makemake in partile conjunction with Eris at the top of the chart. He did set aside lands and he was concerned about resources running out. This is more the activist of the two as far as environmental activism, as far as earth issues. In fact, when you look at their chart together, which I have somewhere here, let's see. Here is their chart together. So Roosevelt is on the outside wheel. And if you look at the way it lines up, it's so fascinating because the the Haumea of Teddy Roosevelt aligns with the North Node, right? Partile connection with the North Node in Mir's chart. His Makemake and Eris, which are very close together, are aligned with the Haumea in Teddy Roosevelt's chart. And the 5-degree mark of Pisces is a perfect semi-sextile to the 5-degree Makemake in Mir's chart. So Mir's chart has the 5-degree Makemake and the 4-degree Haumea, and that lines up with Teddy Roosevelt's chart. So I thought that was very interesting. They partnered. You know, Yosemite Valley was finally declared as part of the Yosemite Wilderness that was set aside by Roosevelt. And he went to, that was a camping trip. They went to Yosemite Valley together. They knew each other. And Mir showed him around. So they were very connected in that way about nature things. Now, one thing that I think is very interesting is, we'll take a look at some of these examples, but that chart that I showed you with Paul Watson, where the grand trine exists, and it has the Eris with Saturn and Neptune. If you take a look at that with also these other outer planets, these other dwarf planets, KBO planets, beyond Pluto, the other two, Haumea is at 14 degrees. So believe it or not, that grand trine has another member with Haumea being a member of it when you look at all the planets, all the KBO planets. And interestingly, his Makemake, I mean, the transiting Makemake at the time of the founding of Greenpeace aligned with his Haumea also. So you just find this stuff everywhere you look. They're just very fascinating and definitely serious archetypes. They're talking just items for our times. You know, I mean, when the planets discovered the zeitgeist, it reflects in the zeitgeist, and certainly environmental issues and nature, love of nature, are so much a part of what we're up to right now. It really is key in this 21st century, and these are 21st century archetypes that have come along. I'll just show you one more chart because we want to keep this kind of short. And that is the chart of Julia Butterfly. Julia Butterfly Hill, I don't know how many people know the story, but it's a great story. She was a naturalist oriented person who had a friend, a giant redwood called Luna that was being threatened by logging in the northern part of California, and decided that what she could do about it was she could climb the tree and prevent it from being logged. So she actually did this. She lived in the tree for 2 years through difficult winters. A lot of storms came. She was on a little platform up there. Here you can see her on her platform. And here you can see One Makes the Difference, Julia Butterfly, and what she was able to accomplish because she did save that tree. There's a few acres that are set aside because they're old growth, amazing. I mean, they've been there for 1,000 years, you know. And so she did save the tree. Now, if we look at her chart natally, what's fascinating to me is you see in kind of key examples of things, with celebrities and so on that really make their mark, you see very close aspects. And what you see with her chart is you see her Eris at 12 degrees of Aries. You see her Haumea at 12 degrees of Virgo. So it's a perfect inconjunct to the degree practically to the, well, it is practically to the minute, actually. It's 12 degrees 38 minutes versus 12 degrees 39 minutes. So Haumea, profound connection with nature. And then also we'd expect Makemake because certainly she was an activist in what she achieved and what she did. Well, sure enough, that's another partile connection, in this case with Chiron. You can see other indications around here if you look. I do a more extensive analysis of the chart in articles I've written. But let's take a look at when she climbed the tree. So here we are, December 10th, 1997, when she climbed the tree. And what's fascinating there is, in the sky at 18 degrees was the sun at 18 degrees of Sag, Jupiter at 18 degrees of Aquarius, and transiting Eris was at 18 degrees of Aries, making a trine in fire to the sun. This corresponds to her natal Chiron and her natal Leo position, which is a grand trine with the sun and with transiting Eris, 17 degrees versus 18, 1 degree different. And the other thing that's fascinating here, well, the position of Chiron in the sky, which is relevant, you see, because it was the painful situation of they were going to cut down this tree. It was her friend, her beloved tree, which she had a relationship with. She called the tree Luna and had a friendship with the tree. The Chiron transiting at 13 degrees was very close to her 12-degree mark natally of Eris. And also, of course, it makes a sextile to her natal position of Haumea that's so close. So the transits do also reveal how significant that moment was. And of course, when you look at the story, it's a fantastic story, so significant. Well, there's a lot more charts we could look at, maybe one more. Let's look at the chart of Greta Thunberg. Now, when Greta Thunberg came along and addressed the UN, 15-year-old, addressing the leaders of the world and telling them they were screwing up, I thought of Eris. She's a feminine warrior through and through, speaking truth to power, being very passionate about it. And so I knew that I'd find a strong Eris in her chart. I didn't have any doubt about it. Sure enough, here's her Eris at 19 degrees of Aries in a grand trine with Jupiter and with Pluto. Also square the sun, a little bit wide, 7 degrees off, square the sun. And also square an early morning moon if she's born early. She probably was born early by the square to the moon, which you can see quite close. Additionally, which is quite interesting, there's a yod from Makemake at 19 degrees of Virgo and Mars at 21 degrees of Scorpio, making a yod to her Eris. And Makemake being the activist associated with activism, is an apartile in conjunct 19 to 19 degrees. So, some of these examples are just, you can't make this stuff up. So here's the Eris archetype and the glyph that I designed, Makemake, Haumea, and the book. Now this book only mentions Eris. There is an article in the Mountain Astrologer magazine that came out in April of 2020 where I talk about all 3 of these planets. And there is a book coming out that I'll announce when it gets closer. And we do have more resources for you in the Astrograph website. And we're going to publish those along with this article so you can see more information there. And of course, the TimePassages software is also available, has all of them in it. Interpretations mostly for Eris right now, but there are going to be interpretations for these other 2 nature planets. Pretty soon we will do that. So let me switch back. And thanks for going on this ride with me. I wanted to show you the basis for why I consider these new planets. Uranus was discovered in the 1700s. In the mid-1800s, Neptune came along. And every time a new planet is discovered, we find the meaning and we find how significant it is. And Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto from the 1930s are so important in charts. We really understand that it extends what we knew about astrology as a human race from the ancients, which was going up through Saturn. And those planets up through Saturn do correspond to more of the physical realm, ordinary kind of life on Earth. Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto refer to going beyond that into other dimensions of existence, transpersonal dimensions. And it's true that Pluto is the furthest out and also the deepest within. It really refers to soul level matters. And that's why I believe that Eris, in its feminine warrior energy, has to do also with soul level matters. So I call it a feminine warrior in support of soul intention. It's so important to be able to tune in to what you have deep inside you that only you uniquely have, and what you cannot not do, what you have to express, and find that theme and begin to act upon it, and begin to act in the most authentic way corresponding to who you really are. That's what your challenge is in this lifetime, to come to that. And now we have additional information from these other two KBO planets from Haumea and Makemake that are very interesting additions to this, that we all have a profound connection to nature, that deepest part of ourselves is not different from nature, that when we consider who we are, we have to consider ourselves as part of nature, as part of humanity at large, all men, all beings, I should say. I mean, just men, of course, men and women, human beings, all creatures are part of us, and we are part of those creatures and part of nature. And that's a fundamental truth that's beginning to emerge. And when it does, you realize how your soul is connected and how this is all a beautiful pattern. The universe is working with us, and that's part of what the beauty and joy of astrology is recognizing that. So thanks again for watching, and see you next time. Take care.